As you might guess by all those new luxury towers, Boston's getting more revenue these days from its taxable property. But more than half the city's land is tax exempt. Since 2011, tax-exempt institutions such as universities and hospitals have been providing some revenue in voluntary payments in lieu of taxes, or pilot money. The payments have increased, but they're also falling short of progressively higher requests from the city. That's why two city councilors have asked for the payment system to be reviewed. We'd like to welcome one of them, the district councilor representing East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End waterfront, Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you.
It's you and Councilor Essaibi-George who want to look at this right now. What is it that makes you want to get a closer look?
I think we're in the middle of budget season, and it really made it very clear to us that with 70% of the city's revenue coming from property taxes, that the increased burden and the increased amount is only coming from us. And there are huge institutions. These are not poor institutions that are growing, that have a great deal of revenue, but because they're nonprofits, they're not paying any form of taxes. And they made a commitment in 2011 to pay 25% of the taxed assessed value of the land that they have. And we're really asking them to fulfill that promise.
What about some perspective? Boston Municipal Research Bureau says, look, these payments have almost doubled, maybe even more than doubled since 2011. It's a successful system. So where do you see that there needs to be some fixes?
Well, I mean, so that's one institution that's patting itself on the back for, increasing its amount. And yes, there have been, since that task force, an increase in the payment in lieu of taxes. But there's two things. One, the assessed value of their properties doesn't happen on an annual basis. So we're talking about 2012 numbers about the value of their property. So that's one. So the amount that they probably should be paying is much higher. And two, I think we in 2017 assessed about almost $50 million for them to pay, and we got $32 million. So that's still falling short of about $20 million, which I'm sure the taxpayers in Boston would like to see fulfilled.
Well, it seems that the largest batch of money is coming from educational institutions, if I'm not mistaken. The
largest batches, but we also have hospitals, cultural institutions. Massport is also paying some form of pilot payments as well. So this is not a foreign concept. And the other thing I'd like to note is, of the 25%, half is cash, the other half is in community benefits. But the community benefits are not defined for these institutions. And that's something else we could be doing simply just as a community and as a city, saying these are exactly the benefits that we expect you to be providing. So there's ways in which we can almost help them and guide them in how they're going to benefit our city, but then also really hold them accountable for the promises that they made and making sure they keep their word.
One thing I've noticed over the years is when I look at percentages of what the city has requested among the educational institutions, I see there's a whole range. Some of them are very close. Some of them are, way down below that too.
Right. And so there's not uniformity even in their payments. And so the question that the city, that we have as city councilors is, where's the money? Where's the beef? You're growing consistently. You have plans for your growth. You have plans for your height. You have plans for your institutions. And so in as much as they're going to be neighbors and institutions in Boston, then the city needs to understand its benefit from those institutions as well.
What about cultural institutions? Even the Research Bureau says they don't seem to be as embracing this as the other categories. And I know there are some well-endowed institutions that said, we don't like this.
No one likes paying taxes. No one likes it. It's not a question of liking it. It's a question of, if you're an institution that prides itself on character, on history, on being a good neighbor, then this is the kind of the obligation of being a good neighbor in Boston as an institution. And again, if they instead came to the table and said, what we don't like is the cash component, we'd like to really redefine what is the benefits, that's a wonderful conversation. But to just not do it on either concept or either way is really unacceptable.
What about the city services for the institutions? Right. I know some of the universities have their own police forces, but aside from that, aren't there things the city has to do for these institutions?
Well, yeah, some of them have their own, or they work directly with Boston Police as well, and also with our fire and also with our 911 system. They also many other students are living off campus in our housing. And you're looking at, using our transportation system, all of these things, I mean, they're, in many cases, they are just like any other set of residents, except they're bringing in a whole new class of tens of thousands of people every single year. And so what we're saying to the institutions is, in as much as you are growing in Boston, growing around Boston, you need to be contributing more to Boston.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with the District 1 City Councilor Lydia Edwards. Lydia, I want to ask you about another issue I'm sure you're very interested in, and this is regulating short-term rentals. We call them Airbnb. Yeah. And the city, through the mayor, has come out with a proposal to just allow these basically in owner-occupied housing, up to 3 units, I think. Why restrict it to that? I
think that what we're trying to do is first set regulations, and that in and of itself is a tough thing to do. We, I think, are trying to set the narrative for what short-term rentals should be in Boston, and for many of us, it should be side income for an owner that we can hold accountable. It shouldn't be a burgeoning industry for folks to be able to, lease out several apartments and then make money off of that. It shouldn't be a way to skirt the regulations, the sanitation code, the business code and revenue of a hotel industry and being able to run many hotels in neighborhoods. We are basically saying Boston is for Bostonians and long-term tenants. And while we are excited about visitors, we're excited about tourists, we're not going to build, or our units are not necessarily going to be built just for them. We're going to prioritize Bostonians.
What about Airbnb saying we ought to let tenants basically sublet for short-term rental? What about that?
Yeah, and I've never really understood that narrative, or that they were, a tenant lobbyist in any way, shape, or form. This is the first time I've heard them come out for anything for tenants. I mean, we've had Jim Brooks, we've had all sorts of issues with rising rents. I've heard them, they've been absolutely silent. So I find their sudden interest in tenants' rights to be a little bit suspect. But in as much as they are making an argument, or some people are making an argument, that tenants need this for their own income to pay for rent, I would argue that that's what roommates have been traditionally for. I would also note that in many cases, the way in which we punish or try to regulate the short-term rental is actually on the shoulders of the property owner. So if I have a tenant who's violating the new ordinance and they're assessed at $300 a day, that $300 a day is assessed as a property lien on my house as the owner. So I feel like if you're the owner and you're getting all of the burdens, then you should be the one that gets the benefits.
Another thing I do wonder about, can the city really figure out a way to know how a property is being used? If you're going to cap the amount of days, let's say, it's being used for short-term rentals, I mean, how's the city going to know it's being used?
Well, I think there's a couple ways. One is through registry. So you have to register your property and making it very open. And if you're going to be advertising it, I think it's only fair that the registry be public. And so this is going to be a complaint-driven process. So if I see somebody coming in across, with a bunch of luggage coming in and out of my friend's apartment all the time, then I'm going to look on the registry, and if they're not registered, I'm going to file a complaint saying that this is an unregistered short-term rental. That's one. And then two, it's really getting the host sites, the Airbnbs, the Craigslist, all of them to come and provide their data to us and to work with us. And I think this is actually an opportunity for them to demonstrate some good faith and to compensate for some of the bad propaganda that they put out earlier, and to show that they are actually willing to work with the city of Boston and are really wanting to make sure that this is a regulated industry.
Now, anecdotally, from glancing at Airbnb myself, I know that there are a lot of big properties with some of these units being used this way. How do you get to the sense that this is really a threat to the supply of affordable housing?
I think it really came down to a lot of the folks in the city saw that there was almost as many as 2,000 units that are just Airbnb, 2,000 apartments that are just Airbnb all year round. And that when we're dealing with a housing crisis and shortage, and we need a place to put long-term Bostonians of any income level, and you're seeing 2,000 units being taken off, right? That was, I think, an alarm system for a lot of folks. And then there were just people who were calling and telling their local elected officials, these Airbnb, they don't care about our trash days, they don't care about our parking, they don't care about a lot of things in our neighborhood. And and we also had people who were just simply displaced and evicted. It was more money to be made.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
City Councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards. In a moment, we'll tell you about a celebration tomorrow being hosted by La Alianza Hispana.